All right. Well, if you got your Bibles tonight, open up to the book of 2 Kings. 2 Kings will be in chapter 6 of 2 Kings. And we're going to talk about three guys or four guys, excuse me. Four guys, I would say, not three guys, but there were four lepers that lived in a kingdom. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background to that with what was going on. Because the prophet of the time was Elisha. And there was another country called Syria, and they were kind of giving Israel a hard time. And so the story goes like this. Elisha lived in a city called Dothan or Dothan, whichever one you want to call it, it's just fine. But he lived in a city called Dothan, and the king of Syria was warring against Israel and laid a trap for Israel. And God came to Elisha, and God told Elisha, hey, Elisha, this is what's going on. This is where the trap is. This is what the king's doing. Warn Israel. So Elisha goes to Israel. He tells Israel what's going on. Hey, the king of Syria laid a trap. This is where the trap is. This is what it's going. Be careful about that. So Israel avoided the ambush. And so the king of Syria got all his commanders together, and he says, which one of you is a spy? Which one of you guys are ratting out my battle plans to the enemy and leaking this out and is, basically a turncoat? And so his general said, well, it's not us. There is a prophet in Israel that knows everything you say. That's literally what they said. There's a prophet in Israel that knows everything you say. He even knows what you say in your bedchamber. That's literally what they told him. They said, it doesn't matter how private you think your conversation is. This guy probably knows it. Now, that wasn't necessarily true, but that's what they believed. And they were like, you say it, this guy knows it. You say it out loud, this guy knows it. So he said, okay, I want that prophet. So he doesn't just send like 2 guys or 3 guys or 5 guys or 20 guys. He sends an army, all right, an entire force out to Elisha's city, to the city of Dothan. There, they surround the city, and the story goes like this. Elisha goes out, and his servant actually was the first one to look out. His servant kind of flipped out on him. There's all these bad guys everywhere, and the city's surrounded. And what did Elisha do? Elisha prayed and said, God, open his eyes the way you've opened mine. And then the servant could see the angels that were surrounding the enemy force that were surrounding the city. And so then Elisha prayed and asked them to be struck with blindness. And the entire army went blind. At that point, I would probably second guess my desire to sign up for the Syrian army. Because every one of them at this point are blind. Every single one of them that were there. And Elisha goes out, and Elisha's one of my favorite prophets in the Old Testament. Really is. One of my favorite people to study. But he goes out because he had to have a sense of humor. And he goes, who are you guys looking for? Like you didn't know. And they said, well, we're looking for Elisha the prophet. They're still trying to stay true to what they were commanded to do, which tells you how fearful they were of their king, their commander. And they said, we're looking for Elisha the prophet. We've been told to bring him back to our king, the king of Syria. And Elisha's like, I know right where he's at. Everybody come with me. He probably had them holding hands and everything else. I don't know. But he leads this entire army into the area known as Syria. Now, Syria was an area that sat north of Jerusalem, north of the main kingdom of Israel, and everything like that. That was the area of Syria. And inside this area of Syria was this city, the main city called Syria. And Syria was a walled city, so it was protected. It was fortified. And this is pre-siege weapons. Okay, they didn't have catapults, they didn't have cannons, they didn't have trebuchets, they didn't have anything. I mean, if they were going to try to go over the walls of the city, they would have to fashion ladders and lean them up. And you know how those battles worked, right? You'd start climbing up the ladder and they'd try to push your ladder off the wall. And if that didn't work, they would pour either boiling water or oil or, hot coals, whatever they would to burn you, stop you, hurt you, and keep you from attacking that city. So a walled city was like the great fortification. And so Elisha leads these men into the city of Samaria. And did I say Syria before? Samaria. Syria was north of Israel. I'm talking about Samaria at this point. So he leads them into the city of Samaria, brings them all in there. The king of Israel was located in Samaria at this time. That's where he was. And so they come in there, and then Elisha prays and asks God to give them their sight back. So their sight comes back. They realize they're standing in the very middle of the city of Samaria, and there are arrows pointed at them and swords drawn. They walked into a trap. All right, is what happened. They had literally walked into a trap. And so the king of Israel asked Elisha, he said, hey, give me the command, I'll kill them all. We'll kill them all right now. Elisha said, no, send them on their way. So they sent them all on their way and let them go back. Now, Elisha was not captured. All right, and the Bible even says there in the sixth chapter, we're in the sixth chapter. In the sixth chapter there, it says that, they never came back into Israel again. But they did journey back into Samaria, which was, a tributary of Israel, if you will. But that's what happened. So that kind of made the king of Syria a little upset that his entire band, the army that he sent after this one guy, failed. So that's where we're at. So I want you to look at 2 Kings chapter 6. We're also going to be in chapter 7, but we're going to start in chapter 6 here. In 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 24 and verse 25, look what it says. It says, and it came to pass, all right, after this, that Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered all his hosts. No more sending a group, even a large group, but let's get them all together, and went up and besieged Samaria. And there was a great famine in Samaria, and behold, they besieged it until an ass's head was sold for 80 pieces of silver, and the fourth part of a cab of doves, dung, you read that right, for 5 pieces of silver. That's how bad things had gotten in the city of Samaria. So the king besieges Samaria, and that's what they would do. They would say, if this is a walled city, if this is a fortified city, we will besiege this city, we will surround this city, and they may stay inside their walls, but guess what was outside the walls? Their food supply, their food source. Now, they probably had stored food sources, so they could last for a while. But the longer the siege lasted, the lower your food sources get until they're depleted. And then their water sources would be temporary as well, because a lot of times enemy armies would build dams that would block the creeks and rivers that would come in to flow into the city, and they wouldn't be able to have a water source at some point. So what they didn't have saved up and stored, they wouldn't have. So once their sources began to run out, they said, okay, this isn't very good. This is pretty bad. And that's how bad it got in Samaria. So they sieged the city of Samaria, surrounded it, and wouldn't let anybody out. If anybody came out, they'd kill them. That's what they would do. And so the people are holed up in the city. They can't come out of the city. They're stuck there until things got so bad that if you wanted to buy the head of a donkey to eat, now I don't know about you, but you don't run down to the local, steak restaurant and say, give me a donkey head. Right? I want this. I mean, I have been in areas where you eat some interesting parts of animals. Right? And they're like, what? Oh, you would eat that part or this part? They didn't let anything go to waste. But like the head was like about the worst part. There was a lot of bone, a lot of things that you couldn't eat. A lot of meat was very gristly. It wasn't real easy and pleasant to eat. And it became very, very expensive. Very, very expensive. Now, I was looking at a thing the other day. I think it was this year. I can't remember. But it was somewhere around, I think they said it was like 60 years ago or something. Spam was invented by Hormel. Did you know the people that make the chili made Spam? They invented Spam. You know what Spam was invented for? To be like a cheap alternative to like canned ham and things. So it was a cheap alternative. And now, Spam is like one of those, you look at a can of Spam and you're like, I'm not paying that. Why would I want to physically pay for that? That much money for a can of Spam. I thought about getting one, and then I thought, no, that's a waste of money. All right? Now, here's an interesting tidbit of information for you. If you go to, has anybody ever been to Hawaii? All right, a few of y'all have been to Hawaii. If you go to Hawaii, what's one of their delicacies that they love eating? Spam. Always knew something was wrong with Hawaii. Okay, I'm like, I don't know about that. But it is, and it's very expensive to eat there. Very, very expensive to eat. And you like this canned minced meat that has this yellowish gelatinous substance on top of it. It's true, right? And some of y'all may scrape it off, and some of y'all may say, no, that's the best part. I don't know. I don't judge. All right? Not judging. I don't know you. But literally, it's expensive to buy that stuff. I mean, it was literally invented to be a cheap alternative, wasn't it? So what they're trying to say here is that the worst became very expensive because the best or the good was no longer existent. You find out how expensive things get when things don't exist, right? I mean, how many of you remember many years ago in the year 2020 walking into a store just to buy, a package of toilet paper? And they weren't there. And then when they were there, it was expensive. Like, stores knew it. They raised their price, right? And so you'd be like, what are you going to do? You're like, oh, well, I guess I need toilet paper, so I guess I'm going to pay their prices. And I remember when they were talking about, I remember when eggs were going up and down. And does anybody remember when eggs got to like $6 a dozen? $6, that's like 50 cents an egg. I mean, that's crazy, isn't it? Just thinking about that, it's just kind of crazy. But what were you going to do? If you wanted eggs, you had to pay the price, didn't you? Things were so bad in the city of Samaria that people were paying silver and gold for the worst things that they could literally put in their mouth. Why? So that they could survive. That's where it happens at. But I'm not going to talk about the people inside the walls. I want to talk about 4 people that were sitting outside those walls. Things were just as bad for these guys because there were 4 men who suffered from leprosy that lived there in Samaria, but because they had leprosy, guess where they had to live? Outside the city walls. You say, wait a minute, I thought everybody went outside got killed. Well, the Syrian army didn't care about these guys because they already had a death sentence on them. Now, they wouldn't let them just roam through their camp or do anything else. They would kill them if they tried to do that. But they said, you stay in your little camp where you're supposed to be. We'll leave you alone, but you can die with the rest of your city because you are our enemy as well. Now, I want you to look in chapter 7, verse 3 of chapter 7. It says, and there were 4 leprous men at the entering in of the gate. And they said one to another, why sit we here until we die? Why sit we here until we die? I want to talk to you tonight about the danger of idleness, but you could also call it having common sense. All right, having common sense. So that's what we're going to learn about tonight. Let's go to Lord in prayer. Lord, we come before you. And God, we are thankful for your word, what your word means, and what your word is to each and every one of us. God, we pray that your word would work on our hearts tonight, that we would be affected by your word and drawn closer to you from your word. We ask these things in Jesus Christ's name. Amen. So here's the story. Samaria is under siege. Everything's horrible. People are dying inside the city. People are hungry. It even got so bad with the king of Israel that these 2 ladies came and cried out, remember? We're starving, we're hungry, so we made a pact. We would kill and cook my child, and then the next time we would kill and cook her child, and she's hit her baby. What am I going to do? And the king of Israel got very, very mad at one person. The prophet Elisha, right? He was like, no. He goes, man, God can do to me, everything that he wants to do to me if Elisha's head's not on a platter. The last person that said that about Elijah, that didn't work out too well for her. All right? And so, the king of Israel got very, very upset with Elisha. And so Elisha comes and he tells him what's going to happen. He goes, this will be fine. Things are going to be okay. This time tomorrow, things are going to be great, right? I mean, he goes through all that. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. But on the outside of this story are these 4 poor guys suffering from leprosy, their skin falling off. Leprosy, obviously is a skin disease where your flesh begins to die. And it spreads. And so nowadays, in modern times, they have medicine that can treat it. There are operations to remove all that kind of stuff. Back in these times, they didn't have that. They didn't have antibiotics. Because if I'm correct, I believe leprosy is a bacteria. I'm not sure. Does anybody know? Okay, great. We're all on the same side then. We're going to go with it. No. But, and leprosy still even exists today. It is something that still exists today. But usually in first world countries, you just don't hear about it very much. Or if somebody does get it, they catch it so early, they can treat it and it's okay. Well, back then, they didn't have all that stuff. They didn't have modern medicine. They didn't have the treatments available. And so a lot of times it was a death sentence, and you were sentenced to a very slow, very painful death as pieces of your own self began to rot and fall off. And you would try to clean the wounds. You would try to do everything you could, but it never stopped. It just continued and continued and continued. By the way, you'd also lose your feeling in limbs that were beginning to die. So like your fingers would become numb. Now everybody's going, are my fingers okay? Right? Your fingers would become numb, and then the rotting would appear. And that's how it would spread through your body. If even on your face, your nose would be one of the first places that would be affected. Your lips, your cheeks, you would have, like, as your lips and your cheeks would begin to rot and fall off, obviously your teeth, your mouth would be exposed, your tongue. The same thing with it was not a pretty way to die. And here are 4 men suffering from that. And they're sitting outside this city, and probably one of their thoughts is, well, at least we don't have to die of leprosy, because we're going to die of starvation before that. And so that's kind of where we're at here. These guys, they're sitting here and they're going, well, what do we do now? What do we do now? Now, how many times in our Christian life have we ever thought that? Well, what do I do now? Or maybe we fall into that idleness, because with the enemy army there was not much they could do. They couldn't walk away. If they tried to walk away, they could be killed, right? If they tried to flee, they could be executed. If they tried to go into the city, then the city wouldn't even let them in. The doors were shut anyways, but the city wouldn't let them in. If they tried to scale the walls, they would probably kill them, because they didn't want leprosy inside the city at that point either. Now, that's why they were cast out of the city. And so here they are sitting down, and that's what they ask themselves, right? Why sit we here until we die? Why sit we here until we die? Idleness is a great, great danger, isn't it? And to combat idleness, we have to have that right mentality. We have to have that right mindset, or that common sense mindset, if you will, to say, okay, that's not going to work. Has anybody ever seen, somebody that just lacked common sense? Right? They lacked common sense. I remember in school growing up, there's a young lady in my class, a girl in my high school class, and I went to a smaller Christian school, but she was the smartest person probably in the entire school. There wasn't a test she couldn't ace, all right? There wasn't anything she couldn't learn. She was super smart, but it was so funny because, like, common sense, she didn't have any. I mean, she was the most gullible person in our class, and we used to mess with her all the time about stuff like that, because that was the only way we could, because, like, if it was an academic competition, the rest of us would fall far short. All right? But I mean, it was just, we'd have a good time with her. We'd say something, we'd be talking about something, and she'd be like, what, really? Seriously? Are you for real? And I don't know, we were just making up stuff and talking about the most ridiculous stuff. And she'd be like, when did that happen? And we'd just all get a laugh out of it, right? Common sense. So here are these 4 men, and they're sitting here, and I love how common sense began to kick in, and it took away the idleness that they had in their life. And we as Christians, we need to make sure that idleness doesn't set into our Christian life, right? Idleness needs to not set into our Christian life. I'm going to rat out one of our teenagers. I was talking to him this morning, and we were talking about our phones. And I told you before, one of the things that's interesting about our phones, and mine does it every week, it tells me what my daily average screen time usage is. And I told him, I was like, man, if I ever hit like 3 hours, I'm like, I got to cut back. And I said, a lot of mine is in the morning and the evening, because I'll pull it up and I'll look at my news apps and see what's going on, right? And that's kind of one of the things that I do. And I was like, that's where I get my time at. That's where that comes in at, because I'll be looking at that, or and I'll even do it like throughout the day. If I got a minute, I'll look down, I'll look at news articles and just see what's going on. But I was sitting there talking to some young people, and one of them was like, yeah, they said, he goes, yeah, I got excited because mine went down to 7 hours. 7 hours. I was like, what was it before? And he was like close to 10. Okay. I was like, 10 hours a day on this. All right? Like on. Now, he did tell me, he said, yeah, well, part of that is I like watching YouTube at night, and he goes in the shorts and it'll just automatically play through them all. He goes, I'll fall asleep doing that. So it'll do that for, a couple hours after I go to sleep or something. And I was like, all right, I'll give you that. I got that. And then I was talking, then there was one of our young teenagers was sitting there, and she looked at me and she goes, well, I was sick for a while and mine was 17 hours a day. when I was sick, and I was like, did you ever put your phone down? Like, that's like, what is that? That's 5 hours of sleep or so, all right? 5 or 6 hours of sleep, and the rest of the time, or no, it's 7 hours of sleep in it. 7 hours of sleep, and the rest of the time you spend on your phone. And I just thought, that's kind of funny. Now, it's easy, though, right? It's easy because now you have this device that didn't exist before. Now, I'm not preaching against phones, but you had this device that didn't exist in years gone by. Because I remember as an 11-year-old disappearing from the face of the earth for hours on end. At least that's what my parents thought. Because I would get on my bike and I would ride. The hair in the wind in my hair, right? And somewhere there was a ramp made out of plywood and bricks that was calling my name. And we would just disappear because these didn't exist and you didn't have that. And if you wanted to go make a phone call, I'm pretty sure it was a quarter when I was a kid, not a dime. I think it was a quarter by the time I was growing up. But you had to have a quarter in your pocket. If I had a quarter in my pocket, I wasn't going to make a phone call. I was going to go buy some bubble gum. All right, I'm just telling you how it was. That's what I was going to go do. And so, like, and I was talking to somebody about that before too. It's like, man, the simplicity of existing before these things, because that's what this does, right? You can get on there, and there's social media, and there's entertainment media, and there's all these things, even news media. You got to be careful with that, and it can all draw you in. The funny thing was, there was another person involved in our conversation. It was Tom Calvert, one of our deacons. And he sat there and he goes, how do you find that out? Like, how do you find out what your average screen time is? And one of the young people was like, here, give me your phone. I thought it was hilarious. And I said, this is going to be good. So they pulled his phone up and they looked at it and they go, 24 minutes. 24 minutes was your average screen time. And I said that was probably him scrolling through who he needed to call. And so we were kind of laughing about that. But it's like, it's easy to fall into a trap of idleness with the technology that we have today, because it is a trap that pulls us in, and we can fall into it. We can, this is great, and and the next thing you know, you're like, oh, I love this. I was talking to somebody about these little short videos on YouTube. They're only like 30 seconds long, and I said, yeah, they're dangerous. Because you're like, oh, they're only 30 seconds, and 4 hours later, you're like, I really need to go to sleep. What happened? You got sucked into the trap of idleness, right? Because it's entertainment. You're just doing that entertainment thing. And there used to be preachers that would preach against television. Prime time TV and everything, because people would sit down and you sit in front of the TV like all the time, and that's all you do is sit in front of the TV. It's not necessarily the TV. It's not the phone. It's the idleness that's involved in that. Spiritually, we can fall into the same trap. We can fall into this trap of spiritually becoming idle and not doing or wanting to do or even having a desire to spend time with God. We don't want to do anything for Him. We don't want to do anything with Him. We don't want to spend any time with Him. And we're just like, well, I've got this entertainment thing on my side. So how do we combat that? Well, the first thing we see is that we need a little dose of realism. We got to be realistic. Let's just be real about stuff, right? Now, Darren's not here. He can't defend himself. Because, Darren and I, we always joke around about, he's an optimist and I'm a pessimist, which is not true. I'm a realist, which is someone who doesn't, you're a pessimist that doesn't want to be identified as a pessimist, I think is what that actually is. All right? But I'm just like, no, I just want to be real about this. Like, if we do something, like maybe we build something or put something together, and I'm like, Darren will be like, I got a good feeling about it. I'm like, I don't know. Right? That's how because, and I start looking at all the possibilities. Now, a pessimist expects something bad to happen. I don't expect something bad to happen. I just want to be prepared when it does. Okay? But I joke about that, and I used to be like, no, I'm a realist, right? Well, the truth is, we need to be realistic in our life. And that's where these guys finally got to, right? In verse 3, it says it there, chapter 7, they said, why sit we here until we die? The reality of their situation set in. They said, we're dying with the rest of everybody else. Why? Why are we willing to just be content to sit outside this city, outside these city walls? We're not accepted by our city. We're not accepted by, Syria. The army's around us on the outside. The city walls are on the other side of us. Why are we sitting here? Why not just do something about it? That's what they said. So the reality of where they were at came in. I love what Ecclesiastes chapter 10 tells us. Verse 18 of Ecclesiastes chapter 10. This is what it says. It talks a lot about being slothful and idleness. It says, by much slothfulness the building decayeth. What does that mean? Well, if you don't work on it, what's going to happen to the building? It's going to fall apart. If you don't take care of it, it's going to fall apart. When things begin to get weathered, things begin to wear out. And then things begin to implode upon it. If we don't take care of this building, what's going to happen to it? It's going to begin to fall apart. You say, well, it's made of brick. Well, not the roof. I've been up there. I know the roof's not made of brick. All right? And what happens if there's a hole, and maybe a tree branch falls and lands on the roof, and you say, oh, well, it's a sunroof. Because, I'm just going to leave that open because fixing a roof is an awful lot of work. I mean, you got to repair the wood, and then you got to re-shingle it, and that's just you're talking hours worth of work, and you got to do the shingles right, or I don't have that in me. So we'll just leave it open. How bad can it get? The answer is real bad. I'm a realist, okay? Right? They can get real bad. And that's what he's saying. That's what that Solomon is saying here in Ecclesiastes. Remember, this is Solomon talking when we look at the book of Ecclesiastes. This is King Solomon, the wisest man in the world. What does he say? Hey, if you're slothful, if you don't care about taking care of things, it's going to start falling apart. He says, through the idleness of hands, the house droppeth through. That's what he said. What does that mean? Don't take care of it, it will collapse. If you don't take care of it, it will collapse. Now, apply that to your Christian life. Apply that to ministry. If God has given you ministry, if we're to work in the ministry, if we don't take care of that ministry, if we don't put work into that ministry, if we don't put effort into that ministry, it'll collapse. It'll collapse. We know this is true. I talk to our van and bus workers about this all the time. If we're not out there and we're not visiting those young kids, right? What reason do they have to come to church then? They need somebody knocking on our door on Saturday morning saying, "You going to be up? Because we're going to be here honking a horn." Right? It's hard enough to get them to get up on Sunday morning when you do stop on Saturday, the day before, right? And so it's but if we don't do that, it's we have to make a contact. I love our workers that are involved in our ministry. They're like, hey, if I'm not going to be there, I'm at least calling them. I got a family thing going on, or I got this conflict. I'm calling our kids because I need to talk to them. They need to know that I love them and I'm going to be there on Sunday morning. Because if we let that go, guess what? People are going to quit coming. People aren't going to care. If we start taking church not that serious, then people just stop coming to church. And when people stop coming to church, they quit caring. Why do people quit coming to church, by the way? Because they stop caring about church. That's the honest truth. People quit coming to church because they stop caring about church. They stop caring about God. Now, I'm not saying you're like, uh-oh, wait a minute, I wasn't in church last week. Now, I had a cold. Does he know I had a cold? I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about work interfering with that. I understand that too. I get that. I know people that is I was talking to somebody, and for years, because they had to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, they were never, ever able to come to a Wednesday night. For years. When they retired, they started coming to Wednesday nights. And I was like, well, it's weird seeing you here. Well, I'm retired now. I can sleep in. That's a good point. I never thought about it that way. I get that. I understand that. But for a lot of people, it's when you stop caring about God, when you stop caring about what He has to do, when the idleness sets in, it's easy to say what? Well, church is not that important. Well, God's not that important. Well, ministry is not that important. How important should ministry be for us? Remember what we talked about this morning? When Jesus saw the multitude, He was what? Moved with compassion. Because He saw sheep without a shepherd. This world is sheep without a shepherd. And we should be moved with that compassion and not allow ourselves to sit idle. And they were these four guys, they were like, we're done sitting here. We're done. There's no point in it. I like what Proverbs 14 says. It says, in all labor, there is profit. That sounds good, doesn't it? You know what that means? Young people, listen to me. I'm going to tell you what that means. Work hard, and you'll get money. Not from your parents when they give you chores. That's just part of living, okay? They give you a bed and a roof and clothing. I could go through all that, right? But if you get a job, what does that mean? Work hard at your job. Put the effort into your job. Maybe try to go above and beyond. That's what it says. In all labor there is profit. I love the second part that he says there. But the talk of the lips tendeth only to penury. That means you can talk about it all you want. You know what penury means? Poverty. You can talk about work all you want. But if all you do is talk about work, where are you going to be in the end? You're going to be broke. That's exactly right. You're like, I need to do this, I need to do this, and I need to do this. Now, men, how many of you say, I need to do this, I need to do that? You got projects at home lining up on you, right? You're like, oh man, I got all these little things I got to do. It's like, I was talking to somebody the other day. I was like, I've got little projects around this church now. It's like every time I walk somewhere, I'm like, oh, I need to add that to the list. I'm going to have to and I always forget. I'm like, well, I've got a list available to me. Just pull it out and type it in on my phone, right? Because I'm like, when I walk back in the office, I'll write that down. Then I walk back in the office and forget to write it down. Then I walk back by again. I'm like, I need to add that to the list. And then I see something else. Oh, I need to do that. Oh, I need to do this. No, I need to do that. And I told him, I was like, man, I got a list of things we need to do, little things, little bitty things that need to be done around here as long as my left arm. I can talk about them all day long. I can sit there and I can be like, oh, we need to do this. I can even we'll have a staff meeting. That'll fix everything. I'll get everybody together in a staff meeting. I'm like, hey, there's a lot of stuff we need to do around here. Here's the list. And Darren could sit there. Yeah, you're absolutely right. All those things need to be done. Ron could shake his head. Yep. All those things need to be done. Candy, absolutely. Those things need to be done. All right, well, okay, good meeting. We can talk about it as much as we want, but if we don't go to action, then it's not going to get done. Ministry is the same way. You can talk, you can think, you can want to all as much as you want. But if you're not willing to put yourself into that ministry, pour your heart into that ministry, work in that ministry is going to die. Because there's no work, there's no effort. That's what it says. Now, can you imagine now, like I said, he's talked about labor, there's profit. Now, if you put labor into ministry, there's profit. Your ministry will go, God will bless it. Now, if you don't, you can talk about it all you want, but what's going to happen to your ministry? It's going to suffer poverty. Well, how does ministry suffer poverty? And I'm not talking about giving either. When I'm talking about suffering poverty, I'm talking about it'll shrink, it'll shrivel, it'll die. That's one of the things, I tell people, if you're in with young people, with youth, with children, you got to be real, and you got to be real about that ministry. They need to see that you're serious about it, because they will read right through you faster than anything. I'm telling you, it's easier to fool an adult than it is a young person. Because they can see how much you care. And they'll see right through that. And they'll be like, well, they don't care about the ministry. They don't care about God. They don't care about church. I'm being excessive here, right? And so then they're going to say, why should I? So I won't. So that's where these guys are at. They had to get to the point where they got real about things, and they said, why are we going to sit here? Let's not sit here. The next thing you see is you got to be a little bit risky. Got to be a little bit risky. You got to take a risk. You got to step out. In verse 4 and verse 5, look at what they said. If we say we will enter into the city, then the famine is in the city and we shall die there. Okay, guys, let's rationalize this for a minute. Let's weigh our options. That's what they said. We go into the city, famine's in the city, we're going to die. And if we still sit here, we die also. Okay, so you guys want to die here in our chairs where we're sitting, or probably actually on a bed, all right, those little roll-up beds they had. We're going to sit here on our beds, we're going to die, or we can try to go in the city and die. Now what they say next? Now therefore come and let us fall unto the host of the Syrians. If they save us alive, we shall live. And if they kill us, we shall but die. So they begin to rationalize. Common sense comes into play. They begin to look at their options. Well, guys, do we want to sit here? We're going to die. Do you want to go into Samaria? We're going to die. Do you want to go to the Syrian army, throw ourselves before them? We got two options. They're going to let us live, or they're going to kill us. Either way, that's probably our best bet. That was the only option they had that didn't involve certain death, right? There was like that possibility of surviving. So look what they said in verse 5. And they rose up in the twilight to go into the camp of the Syrians. They're like, oh, maybe it'll be better at night. They rose up at the end of the day to go into the camp of the Syrians. And when they were come into the uttermost part of the camp of Syria, behold, there was no man there. They made the decision to get up and to go. They said, we have no other options. Look at your options. Folks, I'm telling you, when idleness comes into play, we need to look at what idleness causes, look at what the options are and say, you know what? This isn't something I want in my life. Let me have the option that says, go get up and do something for Jesus Christ. Well, yeah, but doing something for Jesus Christ is hard. That's a difficult thing to do. I understand that, but it's always the better option. Working for the Lord is always the better option. But it's dangerous. I understand that too. But the last time I checked, I'm not sure when the last time someone was thrown into jail in the United States for preaching, or for teaching, or for telling somebody about Jesus Christ. You can stand on the corner of a street and preach. It's still legal to do that. Even in the city of Lee Summit, you could do that. You don't see anybody do that, but you could if you wanted to. There are areas in this world where if you did that in certain cities and certain countries, they could throw you in prison or have you executed. And there are Christians who do it. Despite the fact that they're putting their own life at risk, they do it. Yet it's very easy for us to fall into I don't know. People probably look at me funny and say some stuff. So I'm just going to, I'm going to watch some YouTube shorts instead. Right? And then we fall into that idleness. But here these men, they had to make that decision. They said, no, let's go. Let's put ourselves at risk. We'll see what what the Syrians do to us, and we're going to go. So they gathered up their stuff. It was the evening time, and they walked into the camp, and then they got there, and what happened? There was no one there. There was probably some fires, smoldering campfires. There was food. There was treasure. There was all kinds of spoils. But there was no one there. Not a person. Why? Because God had caused a fear to come upon them in the night. And they rose up and they believed they were under attack and they fled. Because God can do anything that He wants to do. Because God is bigger than an army. God is more powerful than any army on this earth can have. I mean, and we've got some pretty advanced weaponry now, don't we? We fight wars now. We fight enemies not with just soldiers, but with drones. We don't even put pilots at risk anymore. We fly drones and we drop bombs on them from way up high. That's how we fight wars. That's pretty frightening to think about, isn't it? You talk about Russia invading Ukraine. You know what the number one used weapon is that they use? Both of them, Russia and Ukraine? Drones. They use drones. Now, there's a lot of people dying because there's a lot of regular combat, but drones are their main weapon. And I'm not talking about big Reaper drones that look like, giant aircraft or anything like that. Global Hawks or anything. No, I'm talking little bitty drones. They fly these little bitty things just big enough to carry bombs, and they fly them over enemy lines, and they drop them on tanks, and they drop them on aircraft that's, in Russian, on a Russian airstrip. They'll drop bombs right there, fly them across the line. That's what they use. It's pretty frightening to think about that as advanced as warfare is coming to be. Well, back then, they didn't fight wars like that. But let me tell you something. God was still bigger than their army, wasn't He? God's still bigger than any army on this earth. No matter how advanced we think we are, we're nothing compared to God. When I thought about this and I thought about taking a risk. What does it mean to take a risk for God, to be willing to just step out and do it? Because these guys were like, let's just go. That's the only shot we got at living. Let's just go. And one of the people that came to mind was Peter. Peter was that guy. I mean, he was the guy that was willing to take a risk. He's the guy that spoke up when Jesus would ask questions, right? When Jesus would do all these things. But I remember what happened in Matthew chapter 14. And when Peter was in the ship and the storm was raging and Jesus is walking on the water, they thought he was a ghost at first, right? But he wasn't. Then, they cried out and he comes over there and they're like, well, that's Jesus. And Peter's like, Lord, if it be you, bid me come. That's what he says. You can look that up. Matthew chapter 14. Lord, if it be you, bid me come. And I love Jesus' response. What did he say? He said one word to him. Come. Come on, Peter. I'm right here. And what did Peter do? He gets a lot of flack for sinking. We tell him, oh man, he took his eyes off of the Lord. But you know what? If Peter never was willing to take that risk, we would not have a story about faith in Jesus Christ. We wouldn't have a story about keeping your eyes on Jesus Christ, about shutting out all the things of this world and keeping your eyes focused on the one that matters. But because Peter was willing to step out of that boat, was willing to take that risk, that said, Lord, if it's you, bid me come. And when Jesus said come, Peter's like, that's all I needed to hear. And he jumped out of the boat. He was suffering from one of two things, faith or craziness. And I'm willing to bank on the first. Peter had enough faith. Now, I know the storm rose up and he lost sight of the Lord and he started getting frightened because he got further away from the boat and he was in between there. And he began to sink. And what did he do when he sank? He cried out to who? He cried out to the Lord. He cried out to the Lord. And what did Jesus do? Walked up to him, grabbed his hand and pulled him up, walked back to the boat with him. So we have this tremendous story, but this story would have never happened if Peter wasn't willing to take a risk. Folks, I'm here to tell you, you want to have a testimony for God, be willing to take the risk. Step out in faith and say, you know what, I want to do something. I'm willing to talk to somebody about the Lord. I'm willing to invite somebody to my church. I know we're a little crazy there, but I want to invite somebody to my church. I want to bring them to my church so that they can hear, they can see what I see, they can hear what I hear, they can learn what I learn. And maybe you know somebody that doesn't know the Lord. You know what you can do? At the very least, bring them to church with you. Because you know what will happen to them when they come here? They'll meet the Lord. But if we're too afraid or too idle to step out in faith and to say, I want people to know that I'm a Christian. I want people, you know what? I want people to know what I know. What's going to happen to that person? They could die in their sins and go to hell. They may be a Christian and they never grow to the potential that God wants them to grow to. We don't know. So what do? We step out and we take the risk. We say, I'm going to live for Jesus Christ. I want people to see Jesus Christ in me. And they judge me however they want to judge me. They can look at me however they want to look at me. But I'm not going to change. I'm going to step out and I'm going to show people Jesus Christ. These guys were willing to take the risk. And then I want you to look at the next couple verses down here. Because we know what happens. They got there. Here's what happened. We're going to look at verse 8 and verse 9 here in a minute. But here's what happened. They get there. There's nobody there. There's food. There's treasure. There's all kinds of stuff. What did they start doing? What any rational person would do. They probably grabbed some bags and started throwing stuff in it. They were like, oh, look, here's a gold pot. They probably started with the food. Let's just be honest. They probably started filling their bags with food probably after they sat down and ate. They probably began to eat, and they're like, there's cheese here. I haven't seen cheese in I don't know how long. But look at this bread here. There's bread that's not moldy. We don't have to worry about buying a donkey head. There's all kinds of meat here. And they began to eat, and they filled themselves, and then they probably began to fill their bags, and then they said, you know what? These guys left everything. I could walk into a tent. Man, there's a lot of stuff here. There's spoils from this army. And they began to fill their bags up with all the spoils that they had. And then you know what they did? What any rational person would do. They went and buried their treasure. They were like little pirates. Okay? That's literally what they did. They went and hid their treasure. But then reality set in again. Right? Reality set in again. Look at verse 8 and verse 9. And when these lepers came to the uttermost parts of the camp, they went into one tent and did eat and drink and carried thence silver and gold and raiment and went and hid it. And came again and entered into another tent and carried thence also and went and hid it. They began to spoil the Syrian army's tents. Then said one to another, we do not well. What did he just say? This ain't right. That's what he said. Hey guys, hold on, stop for a second. This isn't right. What we're doing is not right. Like, wait, what? It's not our fault the army's gone. And they left all this food and all these raiments and all these silver and gold and all these spoils they got. It's not our fault. Finders, keepers, losers, weepers. Right? That's what you think. I mean, I don't know how many times I said that as a kid. Didn't matter how many times you say that. Doesn't really count. My mom was very clear about that many times in my life. All right? But they said, we do not well. Reality set in with them again. He says, this is a day of good tidings, and we hold our peace. It's like, whoa, guys, this is the best news we could ever think to get. The army is gone. The siege is over. And we're sitting here hiding stuff and holding our peace. We're not telling anybody. He says, if we tarry till the morning light, some mischief will come upon us. Now get this picture in your mind. They showed up at night. They didn't leave till twilight. They showed up in the middle of the night. There's no army. And they're like, we're starving. There's food. Let's eat. So they sit down and they ate. Then they said, well, there's a lot of stuff in this tent. Let's fill up some bags. So they filled up some bags. They stuffed the stuff in their bags and they left. And they went and hid it. Then they came back and ransacked another tent. It's the middle of the night. And then one of them speaks up, guys, this isn't right. Listen to me, I'm telling you this isn't right. This is the best day we could. This is the best thing we hoped could have happened. This is the best day we've had in our entire lives. The army's gone. The Syrian army has fled. They're nowhere around. This camp is completely empty. And if we don't tell somebody, if we don't do something, something bad's probably going to happen to us. That's what they're saying in the middle of the night. If we wait till morning, something bad's going to happen. Right? That's what he says. If we tarry till the morning light, some mischief will come upon us. He's like, don't risk it. Don't risk it. Then he says this, now therefore come that we may go and tell the king's household. What do we need to do? We got to be willing to do what's right. In those moments when, could they have just ate the food and collected the treasure and went on their merry way? Absolutely, they could have. Would they have been judged for doing that? Probably not. It has been like, hey, things are wonderful. But they thought to themselves, and common sense came into play again, and they said, what is the right thing for us to do right now? The right thing for us to do right now is to go back into that city and to tell the king the siege is over. Samaria needs to know this right now. The king of Israel needs to know this right now. Because the king of Israel was in that city. He was in that city during the siege. And they said, we need to go back to the king. We need to tell the city the siege is over. You guys come out. There's food in the camp. Get what you want. And I know what Elisha said too. Remember what Elisha said to the king this time tomorrow? He's like, there's going to be so much food, it's going to be cheap. You can't almost give it away. When they were selling dung from a bird for a lot of money. And then Elisha says, this time tomorrow, you're going to have the best of the best, and there's going to be a surplus of it. Why? Because God was in it, wasn't it? But it wasn't for these four guys that were willing to say, we're not going to sit here. We're done sitting here. Why are we sitting here? We're going to die if we sit here. And then they rationalized the situation and said, well, here's our options. Let's do this. And then they said, this is our best option. We're going to head toward the enemy encampment. So they went to the Syrian encampment, and then they get there and there's no food there. And then, again, common sense comes into play, and they said, we need to let everybody know. What did they do? They went back, they told everybody, and what Elijah told the king came to pass. What Elijah told the king came to pass. Isaiah chapter 1 tells us something interesting about this. Isaiah 1:17 says, learn to do well. Learn to do well. Then he says, seek judgment, relieve the oppressed. Learn to do well, seek judgment, relieve the oppressed. Christians, what are we supposed to do as Christians? What are we supposed to do as the hands and feet and mouthpiece of the Lord? We should learn to do well. We should seek judgment. That is doing what is right, what God's word says. And then we should want to relieve the oppressed. What did these four men do? They learned to do well. They sought correct judgment. making the right decisions, and then they relieved Samaria that was oppressed. And they said, we're going back and we're telling everybody else. This isn't right that we keep it to ourselves. This isn't right that we stuff up as much as we can and we hold on to it. Everyone needs to know this. All of Samaria needs to know this. Folks, it's not right that we sit here in our wonderful house made with bricks and mortar and shingles and our roof and, nice paint and wonderful carpet and seats and everything else and say, the world can burn, but I have the Lord. God wants us as a church, we are commanded as a church to take this to the world, to relieve the oppression that Satan has upon this earth. The penalty that sin is holding over the heads of everyone. Do you realize that someone who is lost is a slave to sin? And we have the key. Jesus Christ is the one who can set them free. What does it say? If you know the truth shall make you free. If you know the Son, Jesus Christ, you shall be free indeed. That truth of Jesus Christ is what sets people free. And it's our duty to relieve the oppressed. It's our duty to bring Jesus Christ to other people. And when we sit idle, we fail. When we sit idle, this ministry is in danger of crumbling. We don't have the luxury of sitting idle, do we? The Bible tells us Jesus Christ is coming back. We don't know the time, the date, we don't know any of that. But He is coming back. There's no reason He won't be here tomorrow. What are we doing about it? What are we doing about it? Are we showing Jesus Christ to those around us? Are we caring enough about them? We should all have a desire to see every seat in here completely full. Do you realize that? We should have a desire to see every seat in here completely full. Not so we can sit here and do this. Pat ourselves on the back. But so that we can sit here and say, praise the Lord. These are souls that aren't going to hell. These are Christians that are growing in Christ. They're becoming more and more like Him. And the ministry is going to get bigger and we're going to reach more and more people. That's where our desire should be. So we don't have the luxury of sitting idle, do we? We need to be a little bit like these 4 guys that said, why sit we here? Maybe that's where we got to start with. What am I doing? What am I doing here? That's a good question to ask, right? What am I doing here? What is my purpose on earth? What is the purpose of my life? Jesus Christ has that answer. He'll answer it for you. A life that honors and glorifies Him and that brings others to Him. Pour yourself into others. Maybe some of you, you're like, man, it's been so long since I've discipled somebody. Have a desire to disciple somebody. Pour yourself into somebody. Well, the last time I tried it didn't go very well. That's okay. Do it again. If it goes well, it goes well. If it doesn't, do it again. And again, and again, and again. Jesus Christ didn't tell us to quit, did He? There's always work to be done. And we can't sit here idle. Bow your heads with me tonight. Every head bowed, every eye closed. With every head bowed, every eye closed,